Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, my name is Sylvia and I make videos on bookish and writerly things. Reading has always allowed me to escape into someone else's world. Writing allows me to disappear into my own world, and at the same time, both allow me to find myself. Join me as I experiment on how to best tackle projects, figure out how to stick with habit tracking, and celebrate the wins, both big and small. So grab a cup or a glass of whatevs, and let's get on with the video. To another book discussion. My name is Sylvia, and today's review is on You'll Be the Death of Me by Karen M. McManus. This is a random book club pick. According to the internet, this book is centered around three former friends who find themselves engaged in a dangerous mystery. A series of unfortunate events leads them to spontaneously ditch school together. Their attempt to relive their past adventures takes a dark turn when they stumble upon the dead body of a classmate. This book is also under the thriller genre and is described as Ferris Bueller's Day Off meets a murder mystery and is a multi-POV book. Ivy, Mateo, and Kel formed a friendship on a class trip when they ditched the event and had what they called the greatest day ever in middle school. Now in high school, they are no longer friends. Let's start with the main characters. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the three POVs that we have in this book. Ivy is the first character we meet, and her parents are what seems to be too busy to have children. They have their two kids on a conference call at breakfast because they are out of town. And this is sort of the strangest thing, but I also like the idea of it, that they're kind of parenting from afar. Ivy has a fractured relationship with her brother that pulled a prank on her. He switched her speech with an erotic novel that she read in front of the whole school. Her little brother is also a genius and has skipped, I don't remember if it's one or more grades, and she's trying to be basically a tryhard to keep up with him. Ivy is extremely stressed. She is a complete and utter mess because she has lost the class presidency race to Brian Mahoney, whom they call Boney Mahoney, or just Boney. And Boney seems to be the type of kid who kind of is an underachiever who basically ran as a joke. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he's more of the jokester popular guy who was like, hey, if you vote for me, I'm not going to do anything. And everyone kind of like cheered. He's that kind of character. So this is really humiliating for Ivy. Mateo has a mother who is suffering from an illness, and I think it was osteoarthritis or something like that. Don't quote me on it, which limits her working ability. This adds stress financially to his family. He has a cousin who lives with them named Autumn, whose parents died when she was younger. Now, Mateo is dealing with the fact that his cousin seems to be doing something illegal in order to be able to afford his mother's medication, which is extremely overpriced. Now, the family used to own a bowling alley called Spare Me, which I love the name of. But then there was a situation where a young boy ended up falling. I know that he hurt himself. I don't remember if he broke a bone or not, but he ended up suing Mateo's family and they ended up losing the business. Now there is a little bit of friction between Mateo and his former friend Ivy because her father has purchased the bowling alley in which he's going to tear it down and build a bigger and new one. And Mateo feels some kind of way because even though they're not friends anymore, they used to be friends, and he feels like Ivy owed him at least a conversation to let him know what was happening. And I tend to agree. And our third character's name is Kel. And I think he is actually my favorite and the most, the character I resonate the most with, I should say. Kel is an only child and has two dads. One is very overprotective and one is a professor at a college. It's like a local college. And I can't remember if the overprotective one is the same as the professor or not. We don't really get a lot of interaction with them, and the interaction we do get, I believe, is only over the phone. So it was kind of hard for me to tell the difference between the two. Cal has trouble making friends and can't seem to be alone. He goes from relationship to relationship, and he is currently seeing someone new. We get a lot of information about these characters before we actually get to the inciting incident. And I like more of a slow burn book instead of them dropping us into the action immediately. Because I feel like what usually happens is when we're dropped into the action, it kind of like peters off for a while before we get more action again. And I prefer to start slow and then just ramp it up until the end. Now, all of these characters do mention in their chapters that they're kind of missing or longing for that friendship that they used to have when they were in middle school. I believe it was 8th grade, but don't quote me on that. Now, as the morning goes on, by happenstance, all three of our main characters are outside of the school, and they start a conversation, and they start to realize that they're not interested in going into this big assembly where Boney Mahoney is going to be inducted as the president of their class. They decide instead they'd rather leave and maybe try to recreate the best day ever all over again. Then we have this really great moment where Kel, who does impressions, decides to call on behalf of himself and Ivy and pretend to be their parents. When it comes time for Mateo, he has a mother. So Ivy decides she'll call in and pretend to be his mother and say that he's out sick, and it goes horribly wrong. But for the very least, they're off the hook and they decide to go ahead and move on with their day. Now, as they start this adventure of having the greatest day ever, they end up seeing Boney Mahoney. And Ivy is furious because she believes that Boney has blown off this assembly to become president of the class, which she worked hard for and probably rightfully deserved. And she can't believe it. So she decides that she is going to confront Boney and not ask, but demand what it is that he thinks he's doing. She sees him go into a building. And at this point, we're having a conversation about Kel and his new girlfriend, who's kind of a flake. And he mentions that his girlfriend is an artist and she sometimes does art in one of the studios in the building. So he actually knows the code. And of course, Ivy's like, I need this code. I have to get in there. When they go upstairs, they kind of get separated, and I think it's probably because Ivy's on a mission. I don't really remember, and I did read this book, the physical book, from the library, so I had to return it. But she's on a mission, so she's ahead of the boys. When she ends up getting upstairs, she ends up finding Boney Mahoney dead, having died by what looks like an overdose of drugs because there is a needle either in his arm or near the body. And Ivy has this phobia of needles, so she ends up passing out very dramatically just by looking at the needle. The boys end up carrying her out because they hear sirens. So either someone has called the police or the police are on their way. Nobody knows. They end up leaving. I believe, and I didn't write this down, that they end up going to Mateo's work, which I believe is a bar that's closed, so that they can kind of recover from what's just happened, and they're watching the television in this bar. There is a report that they're looking for a 20-year-old or 20-something-year-old who actually kind of matches the description of Ivy. Now, this was interesting to me because I wasn't sure if somebody had called in and gave that information. It seems like they would have, but even if they're talking about seeing Ivy go into the building, they would have seen the boys because they were all together. And if they're talking about after the incident happened, Ivy was being carried out by the boys. So why wouldn't they have mentioned that? So I felt like there was something fishing, and I did make a note of that when I was reading the book. Now they start to question Kel about his girlfriend because the exact studio that they were in, or apartment they were in, was supposed to be, I guess, the same studio that Kel's girlfriend sometimes does art. And they want to know more about her. And he's like, I have to give her at least the courtesy of asking questions before I start to blame her for something or even believing that she's involved in what has happened to Boney. And at this point, I didn't write down whether they heard a noise. I don't remember why they don't just think Boney has overdosed. I can't remember if they heard someone else leaving. That might have been the case. So Kel ends up leaving to go confront his girlfriend. And of course, Mateo and Ivy end up following him. And they end up finding out this huge reveal that his new girlfriend is actually their art teacher who is in her early 20s. So this becomes the first suspect in the book. Her name is Miss Jameson, and she's actually engaged to Coach Kendall from their school. When Kel comes back, he tells them what Miss Jameson said. She claims she wasn't at the actual building at all that morning. Instead, she went to a pottery class. And Ivy's basically just not buying what she's selling. She ends up sneaking into her purse because they're at this cafe, and she takes out her day planner. Inside the day planner, there is a list in which Mateo and I believe Charlie are on. And she asked Mateo about it. He's like, I have no idea. I don't have a class with her. I've never had a class with her. I don't know why I would be on this list. And so I start to think that maybe this is a hit list. The three of them eventually end up at a boy named Charlie's house, who is a friend of Boney Mahoney. Charlie is drunk when they show up, and he actually ends up attacking Mateo because he thinks that he is this bad drug dealer guy. So the story he ends up telling the trio is that he and Boney ended up going to a party, and they ended up finding a bunch of drugs. I don't know if it was in a shed or somewhere at this party. I can't remember. And they ended up stealing a bunch, like 100 bottles of this drug. I can't even remember. It was some ridiculous number. And they decided to end up selling these drugs. So essentially, Boney ended up getting killed because he was a drug dealer, and he believes that it was a drug deal gone wrong. Apparently, Mateo's cousin is also involved. Her name, again, is Autumn. So Autumn ended up catching these guys in the act of stealing these drugs and said she wanted in, because she needed the money. Well, somebody ended up calling them not too long ago asking for a really big score. They wanted a lot of drugs. And Autumn tried to tell them that it sounded fishy. Boney was the one who made the deal, so it was his job to go to the building that they ended up seeing him at and finish the deal. Charlie now believes that the drug dealer that they ended up stealing all these drugs from set them up in order to find them and ended up killing Boney instead. Mateo is feeling really stressed and worried about his cousin, so he feels like it's his responsibility to tell her, hey, this drug dealer is looking for you guys. He's already gotten Boney, and you and Charlie are probably next. Mateo and the group finally get a hold of Autumn and tell her that she needs to get out of town, and she does. During all of this, Ivy and Mateo have a moment alone together when she's trying to patch him up after Charlie attacked him. And they kind of go into this conversation and this question that all readers are having at this point. Why are they no longer friends? Did they simply just drift apart? We don't really know. It's brought up that Ivy had a crush on Mateo, and Mateo did not return her feelings, and feeling sad and embarrassed about it, they kind of just drifted apart. But Mateo says he actually did have the same feelings for Ivy, and that he had left her a note with some sugar baby candies at her house. And once again, she's angry at her brother Daniel because she thinks that he ate the candy and probably threw away the letter. But we end up finding is that Kel, who can't be alone and doesn't make friends well, was really scared that their triangle was going to become a straight line, and it was only going to be Ivy and Mateo, and he was going to be left out in the rain or in the cold. He actually found the note and the sugar babies, and he took them and never gave them to Ivy. Ivy is angry and devastated by this, but we also learned something about Ivy and what happened to Mateo's family and their business Spare Me. After Ivy's brother Daniel switched out her speech and she humiliated herself in front of the whole school and absolutely believes this is the reason why she lost the presidency for class president, she decided to get back at her brother, who was going to be, I don't know, at a party or with some friends at Spare Me, the bowling alley that Mateo's family owned. She put baby oil, you guys, on one of the lanes, hoping that her brother would fall and make an ass out of himself and she could laugh at him. What ended up happening is one of these other boys ended up falling and really hurting himself, and his family ended up suing, which is the reason why Mateo and his mother have lost their business. Now, when Mateo finds out, because Ivy feels like she finally has to tell someone, she explains to him that she was out of the country. Oh, poor little rich girl. She was out of the country, and that's why she didn't know that this boy was going to be suing him and that they were going to be losing their business, or she would have come forward and said something. And Mateo, rightly so, blows up, and he's so angry, and he tells Ivy, like, Losing this business caused my mother's illness to get worse. It caused a lot of stress, and it caused my cousin to become a drug dealer, essentially, just to afford stuff to help my mother and to buy her medication. This woman who she probably thought she owed a lot to since her parents died, and this family has taken her in. And then you have Ivy over here upset with Kel as if what he has done is equally as bad as what she has done to Mateo. And at this point, I had lost all respect for Ivy and I hated her as a character. There is also a card or a letter that belongs to Miss Jameson that was found. I don't know if that was probably in her day planner, but it says that it's from Dee. So now we're trying to figure out who is Dee and does this person have something to do what happened to Boney? Because if it's true that Ms. Jameson didn't go to the building at all, then there has to be a second person, another drug dealer or a killer. I really liked pinning all of it on Ms. Jameson. I like the idea of her being the drug dealer because she's already an awful person who's in an inappropriate relationship with somebody who's underage. They do make it very clear, or the author rather, makes it very clear that they don't have a physical relationship, but this teacher is gross and does like the fact that this young boy finds her attractive. So the suspect pool starts to grow. We start to think that maybe D stands for Daniel, who is Ivy's brother. We also have Coach Kendall, who we also believe might know something about the drugs and about Boney because his fiance, Mrs. Jameson, is involved. At some point, there is another D that's a suspect. I believe his name is Dominic, and he's a teacher at the school. I don't remember what he teaches. So they decide they're going to go to the school and they're going to see what they can find in the office of Mr. Dominic, or just Dominic in general. When they go, they actually end up finding a lot of drugs in Mrs. Jameson's desk. And this prompts Kel to want to go back and ask Miss Jameson more questions. And at this point, I'm like, listen, if she actually did kill Boney, and she is a drug dealer, you don't want to be around or alone with this person again. But he feels like he's comfortable and confident to ask her stuff because he knows her, but he doesn't really know her. There's this one point in the book, and it might be when they find this card that's from D, where he's like, oh, she's not only mine. And in my mind, and I'm sure other readers were like, she was never yours. She's actually engaged to Coach Kendall. So Cal ends up going back and talking with Miss Jameson, and he ends up finding out that her fiance, Coach Kendall, is actually the drug dealer. So drug dealer Coach Kendall is the one she believes killed Boney, and she's terrified. And she's got a new ID, and she's got some cash, and she's already packed her bags, and she's out of here. It's at this point that they do mention that she is seeing someone else, and that the person that she's seeing is just for fun. She's just doing this because she likes the fact that this other person also likes her. At the same time, she gets a text or a call from her brother who says, I need you to come pick me up. I'm stranded. So she does. It ends up being Coach Kendall, who then kidnaps her and takes her back to his house. Of course, when they get there, they run into his fiancée, Miss Jameson, and Cal. A fight breaks out between Cal and the coach. At the same time, because Mateo is no longer talking to Ivy, he has left, but I can't remember if it's Ivy or Cal that ends up calling him right before they go into the house, and he ends up calling the police, who come in the nick of time and end up saving both of the teenagers. It turns out that Coach Kendall is a drug dealer that has a whole drug ring, and so this is a very, very big bust, and he's definitely going to be getting some time. But they end up letting off his fiance, who claims she didn't know anything about this, that her fiance is a bad guy, and when she found out, she tried to get out because he tried to frame her for all of this, and she never knew anything. So Coach Kendall is definitely getting the blame for Boney's death. This is my fourth book by Karen M. McManus, and this is actually my favorite out of them all. I really like that it had a slower beginning and we got to know the characters more before actually getting into the actual mystery. There were a lot of twists and turns in this book. There were also a lot of suspects, which kept it interesting and kept people guessing. As a reader, I thought it was Coach Kendall just because he was the least obvious choice, I think. And as he got a little more obvious, I definitely agreed that it was Coach Kendall. I was hoping that it was actually his fiancée, Mrs. Jameson. The things that kind of disappointed me about this book is Ivy. The author did such a great job of dropping this bomb in between Ivy and Mateo, and it seemed like they couldn't get things back together after she ended up causing Mateo and his family to lose their business. I mean, they lost everything. And Mateo ends up forgiving her. And I thought that was so ridiculous. Well, the story takes place in a day. And of course, like the epilogue, if there was one, I can't remember if there was, happens a little after. But there wasn't enough time in between for him to get over these feelings, in my opinion. I don't think I could ever forgive someone for putting my family through something like that. And I just felt like Ivy was a spoiled, entitled girl. She never had to pay for anything. I just felt like she ended up getting everything that she wanted. And yeah, we know that Mateo wanted to be with Ivy, but as a reader, I did not want them to be together at all. Like sometimes we will say, okay, well, this character I really like wants this thing, so I'm going to root for it because I really want him to get what he wants. I didn't think she deserved having Mateo's forgiveness. It was also kind of weird because I felt like if the author was going to do this, and as a reader, I really wanted Ivy to have to apologize to Mateo's mother. And there's this whole scene where the writer basically has Mateo's mom give a speech about how she didn't really like the bowling alley anymore and she always wanted to sell it, but she didn't know how to tell the kids because they seemed to be so invested and loved the place so much. And therefore it kind of made it okay that Ivy ended up doing everything she did and they lost the business because the mother really didn't want it anyway. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And then Ivy's father ends up stepping in and says he's going to make it right. And he ends up giving Mateo's mom this really great job that gives her benefits so she can actually afford to pay for her medication that is extremely expensive for no apparent reason. And I am just like, really? I just feel like Ivy should have had to apologize to Mateo's mother. I think her name was Reyes. So Miss Reyes. And then taken more accountability for what she had done. She could have really severely injured the boy. I do think in my head that he did like crack his arm or his leg or something. Something happened to the boy. And then the fact that they lost their business. And even Mateo said, like, my cousin would not have become a drug dealer and possibly would have not gotten involved with Boney and all of this stuff had you not been so careless and just been able to take a stupid joke. Even her brother Daniel ends up mentioning this as well. And it also does turn out that Mateo's dad, I can't remember his name, also starts with a D. So he was the D in the card that they end up finding. And remember, because she was talking to Cal, Miss Jameson mentioned that this other guy she was seeing, she was just playing around with him. So the fact now that Mateo's father is engaged to Miss Jameson seems like she's trying to make the world, like her defense, a little bit stronger by saying, oh, look, I'm engaged to this kid's father, so they obviously don't think I'm a bad person anymore, which is not the case. And the father, being such a loser, is just like, yeah, it's okay. She didn't mean it. It wasn't, none of this was her fault. I mean, I don't think that he's heard his son's side of the story, but you'd think that a father wouldn't do something like that. And let's be fair, he is an absentee dad, so he's not much of a father anyway. But I did really like the ending of Miss Jameson and Mateo's father being together. I did not love the ending of Mateo and Ivy being together because I felt like she just got away with a lot of stuff. And also, you're allowed to write the story that way because people get away with murder all of the time. So at the end of the day, it's just probably personal choice. So take that as you will. I also did like that despite my feelings about Mateo and Ivy ending up together, Cal ended up finding another friend in one of the podcast boys, which I thought was really cute. And I thought it was a really nice ending because even though his two other best friends end up finding, you know, a romance or a love between each other, he's not completely alone. And he ended up finding a true friend where he actually does have some of the same interests in common. I also liked that Ivy and her brother Daniel have decided to basically call a truce and try to be more on the brother and sister end than the civil rivalry end. I thought that was really great and important. Another side character I really loved was Emily, who is Ivy's best friend. She's the one that ends up fact-checking these two podcasters in like real time, and I think she does a great job of being this truth finder and a really good friend. It was very funny that these two characters decided, I mean, that's just like where their brains went when they heard about Boney and the fact that Ivy has never missed a day of school, but she ended up missing the day that Boney ended up getting killed. It's been a while since I watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but this is supposed to be a comp for this book. I think that there is a truancy officer that is trying to hunt down Ferris Bueller and his two friends, who also, like, the three of them make up two boys and a girl, just like this book. And I think they did a decent job of making that the news reporter in this book. So there's this news reporter that Ivy really doesn't like. I guess he is kind of not great at his job and has had some interactions with her and her father before this. And they actually run into him a couple of times in the book, and they're trying to avoid him. And this newscaster also ends up reporting and confirming that he did see Ivy in the area, so it's possible that she did do or at least know something about Boney Mahoney and his death. So what readers would I recommend this book to? Any reader who is a lover of contemporary and romance, because I feel like this is a really good gateway book into the mystery / thriller genres, just because it's very light on the thrills, in my opinion, and very much a sprinkling of mystery. It is more contemporary and starts off that way. What writers would I recommend this book to? Any writer who wants to know how to handle a large cast, who has some struggles with side characters and using them to move the story along. I thought the author did a really good job in this book with that. And that is my review on You'll Be the Death of Me by Karen M. McManus. All right, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, don't forget to read a book, write a book. Sincerely, Sylvia.